Have you ever noticed that some people seem to move through life with almost no friends at all? No constant phone calls, no crowded social calendar, no large group chats, no endless stream of social gatherings, just themselves. And while many people assume this must mean they're lonely, unhappy, or socially awkward, the truth is often much more surprising. In fact, some of the most thoughtful, self-aware, and emotionally intelligent people you'll ever meet have remarkably small social circles, sometimes none at all. Which raises an interesting question. If friendship is such a natural part of human life, why do some people struggle to build it? Or perhaps an even better question. Why do some people seem to choose a life with very few friends? The answer has less to do with popularity than most people think, and much more to do with personality. Because certain personality traits naturally make friendships harder to find, harder to maintain, and sometimes less appealing than they are for the average person. Today we're exploring 5 personality traits commonly found in people who have very few friends, and the final trait may completely change the way you think about solitude. The first personality trait is extreme selectiveness. Most people want friendship, but not everyone wants the same kind of friendship. Some individuals are perfectly comfortable with casual relationships, small talk, surface-level conversations, occasional interactions, large social circles. But highly selective people operate differently. They're not looking for more people. They're looking for the right people. And that's a huge difference. They don't connect easily. They don't trust quickly. And they don't become emotionally invested simply because someone is friendly. Instead, they observe. They listen. They analyze. They pay attention to consistency, character, integrity, authenticity. Many people reveal who they are through words. Selective individuals pay attention to actions, because actions tell a much more reliable story. The challenge is that finding genuinely trustworthy and compatible people takes time, sometimes a lot of time. And while others are building friendships rapidly, selective individuals are still evaluating, still observing, still deciding whether a deeper connection is worth pursuing. As a result, their social circles often remain small, not because people dislike them, because their standards for friendship are unusually high. The second personality trait is deep independence. This trait is often misunderstood. Most people admire independence until it becomes extreme. Then it starts creating distance. Highly independent individuals become accustomed to solving problems alone, making decisions alone, managing emotions alone, handling challenges alone. Over time, they become incredibly self-sufficient. They don't need constant support, constant reassurance, constant guidance. And while this sounds like a strength, it creates an unexpected side effect. Friendships often grow through mutual dependence. People bond by helping each other, supporting each other, sharing struggles, asking for advice, offering comfort. But highly independent people rarely ask for help, not because they're arrogant, because they've trained themselves to rely on themselves. The result is that many opportunities for connection never fully develop. People feel less needed, less involved, less connected, and without realizing it, the independent person slowly builds a life that functions perfectly well without a large social network. They may enjoy people, respect people, care about people, but they simply don't feel the same need for friendship that others do. The third personality trait is overthinking. This is where things become especially interesting, because overthinkers experience social interactions differently from everyone else. A simple conversation isn't just a conversation. It's an analysis. A delayed text message isn't just a delayed text message. It's a question, a possibility, a mystery, an unexplained event. Overthinkers notice details most people miss. The slight change in tone, the unusual facial expression, the awkward pause, the missing reply, the subtle shift in behavior. Their minds immediately begin searching for explanations. Why did that happen? What did they mean? Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Should I have handled that differently? Most people let these moments pass. Overthinkers carry them, examine them, replay them, study them. This constant mental activity can make friendships surprisingly exhausting. Not because the friendships are unhealthy, because the mind never fully relaxes. Every interaction creates more questions, more possibilities, more interpretations. And eventually, some overthinkers begin withdrawing from social situations altogether. Not because they dislike people, because interacting with people can feel mentally overwhelming. The fourth personality trait is emotional depth. People often talk about emotional depth as though it's purely a gift. And in many ways it is. Emotionally deep people think carefully, feel deeply, reflect often. They ask questions that many people avoid, questions about purpose, meaning, growth, human nature, relationships, life itself. They crave conversations that go beyond the surface. They want authenticity, honesty, insight, connection. The problem is that not everyone enjoys operating at that level. Many people prefer lighter interactions, casual conversations, everyday topics, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But emotionally deep individuals often feel disconnected in those environments. They can spend hours surrounded by people and still feel completely alone, because physical presence isn't the same as emotional connection. For them, meaningful conversation is what creates closeness. Without it, relationships often feel empty, unfulfilling, incomplete. This creates a difficult challenge. The deeper a person thinks and feels, the harder it becomes to find others who naturally connect in the same way. And when meaningful connections are rare, friendships become rare as well. But the fifth personality trait is perhaps the most powerful of all. In fact, it quietly shapes every other trait we've discussed. It influences who someone trusts, who they avoid, who they allow into their life, and who they keep at a distance. Most people assume this trait develops because of personality. But that's only part of the story. The truth is that it often develops through experience. Painful experience, disappointment, betrayal, broken trust, broken expectations. Moments that teach lessons a person never forgets. These lessons slowly change how someone sees relationships. They become more careful, more observant, more protective. Not necessarily because they want to, because they've learned what can happen when caution disappears. What's fascinating is that most people completely misunderstand this trait. They mistake it for coldness, distance, pride, detachment. But beneath the surface lies something entirely different, something rooted in self-protection rather than superiority. And once this trait becomes deeply established, it can transform the way a person approaches every friendship, every relationship, and every social interaction they encounter. In fact, this final trait explains why some people appear friendly, kind, and respectful, yet still end up with very few close friends. Because even though they may enjoy people, something inside them keeps a certain distance. A distance most people never notice. A distance created not by dislike, but by lessons learned through experience. Lessons that quietly reshape trust itself. And once trust begins changing, friendships begin changing too. Sometimes in ways the person doesn't fully understand. And until you understand this final trait, you'll never fully understand why some people spend so much of their lives alone, even when they seem perfectly capable of connecting with others. Because the real reason often has very little to do with social skills, and everything to do with what happens after someone learns that not everyone who enters your life deserves access to your heart. Because the real reason often has very little to do with social skills, and everything to do with what happens after someone learns that not everyone who enters your life deserves access to your heart. The fifth personality trait is cautious trust. And for many people who have few or no friends, this trait explains almost everything. Trust is one of those things we rarely think about when it's working. We share stories, open up, build connections, let people into our lives, and it feels natural, effortless. But once trust has been broken enough times, something changes. The mind becomes more careful, more observant, more protective. Instead of asking, "How quickly can I connect with this person?" It starts asking, can this person truly be trusted? That single question changes everything, because trust is the foundation of friendship. Without trust, connection remains shallow. Without trust, vulnerability feels dangerous. Without trust, relationships never fully develop. People with cautious trust don't give access to everyone. They don't reveal their deepest thoughts immediately. They don't share personal struggles with people they've just met. They don't assume good intentions simply because someone appears friendly. They watch, observe, evaluate. They pay attention to consistency, because experience has taught them something many people learn the hard way. Words can be convincing, promises can be beautiful, appearances can be misleading, but patterns rarely lie. And once someone begins focusing on patterns instead of promises, their social circle naturally becomes smaller. Not because they dislike people, because they refuse to trust too easily. Ironically, many people misunderstand this completely. They assume cautious individuals are antisocial, cold, unfriendly, detached. But often the opposite is true. Many of these people care deeply, perhaps more deeply than most. The difference is that they protect that care. They don't hand it out carelessly. They've learned that emotional energy is valuable, trust is valuable, time is valuable, and they don't want to invest those things in relationships that may not be healthy. This brings us to a truth that society rarely talks about. Having few friends is not automatically a problem. In today's world, people often treat friendship like a numbers game. More friends equals more happiness. More followers equals more value. More connections equals more success. But reality doesn't work that way. Some people have hundreds of acquaintances and still feel lonely. Others have one meaningful connection and feel completely understood. The number itself tells us very little. What matters is the quality of the connection. And people with these 5 personality traits often prioritize quality over quantity. Every single time. Think about the highly selective person. They would rather have one genuine friendship than 20 shallow ones. Think about the deeply independent person. They don't need constant social interaction to feel secure. Think about the overthinker. They crave understanding, not just conversation. Think about the emotionally deep person. They want authenticity, not performance. And think about the cautious truster. They want relationships built on reliability, not convenience. When you combine these traits together, you create a person who naturally ends up with fewer friendships, not because they're incapable of connection, because their standards for connection are different, and those standards often eliminate relationships that others might keep. Another thing people rarely understand is that solitude affects different personalities in different ways. For some people, solitude feels like punishment. For others, it feels like peace. This is a crucial distinction. People who enjoy their own company don't experience being alone the same way others do. They use solitude differently. To think, to reflect, to create, to recharge, to understand themselves, to process life. While others may feel restless in silence, they often find clarity there. While others seek distraction, they seek reflection. And once a person becomes comfortable in solitude, friendships stop being a necessity. They become a choice. That's one of the most powerful psychological shifts a person can experience. Because people who fear being alone often tolerate relationships they shouldn't. They tolerate disrespect, manipulation, neglect, dishonesty, toxic behavior, simply because they don't want to lose the connection. But people who are comfortable alone gain something valuable. Freedom. The freedom to walk away when relationships become unhealthy. The freedom to protect their peace. The freedom to choose quality over availability. And that freedom often results in a smaller social circle, but a healthier one. There's another misconception worth discussing. Many people assume those with few friends lack social skills. Sometimes that's true, but often it isn't. In fact, many socially selective individuals are excellent communicators. They understand people well. They read emotions accurately. They navigate conversations with ease. The issue isn't ability, it's preference. They can socialize. They simply don't feel compelled to socialize constantly. And because society tends to value extroversion, this preference is often misunderstood. People see someone spending time alone and assume they're unhappy. But happiness and social activity are not the same thing. Some people genuinely thrive in quieter environments. Smaller circles, deeper relationships, less noise, less drama, less obligation. Their version of fulfillment simply looks different. One of the most fascinating things about people with few friends is how carefully they choose who enters their lives. Most people focus on attraction. They focus on chemistry. They focus on first impressions. Selective individuals focus on consistency. How does this person behave over time? Do their actions match their words? How do they treat others? How do they handle conflict? How do they respond to boundaries? These questions matter deeply because they understand something many people overlook. The wrong relationship can cost more than loneliness ever could. The wrong friendship can create stress, anxiety, confusion, exhaustion, disappointment. The wrong people can drain years of your life. And once someone learns this lesson, they become much more careful about who they allow close. This caution often appears strange to people who trust quickly. But to the cautious individual, it feels necessary because they know the consequences of misplaced trust. Perhaps the most important thing to understand is that these 5 traits are not inherently strengths or weaknesses. They're tendencies, patterns, adaptations. Each comes with benefits. Each comes with challenges. Extreme selectiveness protects against unhealthy relationships but can limit opportunities for connection. Deep independence creates resilience but can make vulnerability difficult. Overthinking increases awareness but can create emotional exhaustion. Emotional depth creates meaningful insights but can lead to feelings of isolation. Cautious trust protects the heart but can make relationships slower to develop. The key is balance, because every trait becomes problematic when taken to an extreme. Yet when balanced properly, these same traits can create incredibly meaningful lives. Lives built around intentional relationships, authentic connections, mutual respect, genuine trust. And that's something many people spend years searching for. The truth is that some individuals would rather wait years for the right friendship than settle for the wrong one. They would rather be alone than surrounded by people who don't truly understand them. They would rather protect their peace than sacrifice it for social approval. And while society doesn't always celebrate those choices, they often come from wisdom rather than weakness. So the next time you meet someone who has very few friends, resist the urge to make assumptions. You may not be looking at someone who is lonely. You may not be looking at someone who is socially unsuccessful. You may not be looking at someone who struggles to connect. You may be looking at someone who values connection so deeply that they refuse to settle for anything less than the real thing. Someone who learned difficult lessons, someone who became selective, someone who discovered the difference between attention and connection, between company and companionship, between popularity and trust. Because at the end of the day, friendship isn't measured by numbers. It's measured by meaning. And some people would rather have one person they can trust completely than 100 people they can only trust halfway. Not because they dislike people, not because they fear relationships, but because experience taught them something many never fully learn, that protecting your peace is sometimes more important than expanding your circle. And once that lesson becomes part of who you are, your friendships may become fewer, but they often become far more valuable, far more authentic, and far more difficult to replace, because the people who enter your life after you've learned the value of trust aren't there by accident. They're there because they earned a place that very few people ever reach. And for someone with these 5 personality traits, that kind of friendship is worth waiting for.